is that going to affect the pH balance?
Potentially.
All right. Does sun have any impact on pH balance?
Sorry, what?
Does the sun have any impact on pH balance?
Should not.
Okay, so anything such as snow or rain, that would affect it?
Yeah. I will correct myself a little bit. I suppose with taking into account the sun evaporating certain aqueous solutions or solutions in general, that could affect pH.
All right. All right. Then what was your next step?
I went on to perform color tests on the extracts.
Okay. What are you looking for in a color test if you are trying to determine the presence of bleach?
Okay, so there's a lot of color tests to perform. This one in particular is looking for oxidizing agents. So it is a certain chemical that changes color in the presence of certain oxidizing agents, which bleach generally has. It also changes color in the presence of nitrates, which can be found in soil.
Okay, all right. And then what did you determine when you performed those color tests?
So on the first cutting, there was a very faint blue color change, which the positive bleach sample that I used changes to dark blue.
Okay.
So there was a light blue color change in one of the cuttings comparing to a dark blue.
All right. And if we go back to our earlier discussion, if that fabric has been out in the elements where it's been subjected to snow and rain, would that certainly impact it?
Yes.
Okay. What did you note next?
So I then performed a infrared spectroscopy analysis on the sample. So I dried down the water and then ran the instrument.
And what did you note there?
I was unable to get a very strong match. These instruments' results give you a spectra or a series of peaks and valleys sort of thing. And we compare it to a variety of reference samples in libraries. I was unable to identify anything that matched strongly with the sample.
All right, continue.
That finished my analysis for that particular item.
All right. Now, when we go to the second cutting, walk us through that second cutting and what you noted.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was for all three of the cuttings.
Oh, that was for all three.
The only difference between any of them was with the color test. One of them turned light blue. The others have no change.
I understand now. Thank you so much. All right. So then, based on what you had noted, what did you report by way of findings?
I was unable to identify bleach.
All right. But certainly in terms of just the varying findings that, you were able to establish, were there findings that would be consistent with the use of bleach if that fabric hadn't been submitted to the outdoor elements? And maybe that's not an appropriate way to say that, and you can correct me if you want to.
So I'll explain it so my conclusion states my scientific conclusion of all of this data, which takes into account the different elements that could possibly be in bleach and would be consistent with the chemical or physical components of bleach, but it also takes into account what kind of environment it was in and other environmental effects and ruling out everything else to say that this was definitively from this particular compound. In this case, due to the limited amount of sample or the diluted sample potentially, and the fairly weak results for a lot of these samples, I can't say conclusively whether it was consistent with bleach or not, because there are other elements that could be explaining these factors.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, did you analyze the shorts for the presence of bleach?
I did not.
Or the bra?
I did not.
Explain why not.
So when we were coming up with the initial testing plan, we knew that these samples were going to be, they were, I guess, out in the environment for a very long time. We knew that it wasn't going to be a actual sample like liquid bleach. And with our current instrumental and scientific capabilities, we knew it was going to be difficult to obtain data that would be consistent with for an identification or a comparison. So we developed a strategy in which we tried to find the most likely items, being one of the clothing items, the shirt, and then the bottle that would presume to have maybe held a compound. And with the results that we obtained, we did not think any further analysis would indicate any useful information.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So then let's go ahead and let's go down to the second submission. What was the strategy that was developed for the white plastic bottle and then the pieces of the broken white plastic bottle that came in?
So I analyzed the whole plastic bottle with the idea that it would contain the chemicals longer, potentially, than a broken bottle it may have spilled, and be open to the elements more. So I figured the intact plastic bottle would be protected from the elements more so than the other items. So I chose to analyze that item in particular.
Can I ask a question? When that white plastic bottle came in, did it have a lid on it, or was there no lid associated with that container?
There was no lid that I found.
All right. And then my second question would be this. Was there any contents within the plastic bottle itself, or was it empty?
There was what appeared to be soil and debris on the inside.
All right. So walk us through that same discussion.
So the same strategy applied to this bottle in terms of the scientific steps that I took. The only difference being, instead of taking a cutting and an extraction, I rinsed the inside of the bottle with water and then continued on just like I did the previous item.
Okay. After you had rinsed the inside of the bottle and you were able to collect liquid from it, then did you analyze the water itself to determine whether or not there were any elements within it?
Yes.
Okay. What findings did you make?
I apologize. The x-ray was not done on the water extract of the bottle.
Okay. All right. Gotcha. All right. So what various tests did you perform?
So outside of the x-ray, I did the pH test, followed by the color test, and then the infrared spectroscopy.
Okay. What did you know during the pH test?
It was around a pH of 7.
All right. Color?
There was a light blue color and some fizzling.
Okay. And then what do you mean by fizzling?
It produced flash.
Okay, so Joe Richardson, in the last two segments of the show, we've been listening to this in the last part of the 2 hours. Well, you know, it could be affected. I can't necessarily tell if it's bleach because it could be affected. It was out in the elements. It could be affected by sun. It coulda, woulda, shoulda, woulda. But does it matter whether or not he finds any elements of bleach if indeed you have white bottles that look like they were bleach bottles? And, you know, we know that he may have been the last one seen with this young child, he and his son.
Yeah, I mean, and it seems like that would be where the focus was, particularly if there's also the evidence that he's there at the store buying bleach not long afterwards. So simplification sometimes, you know, it can elude us, but that's really the best thing to get to, particularly if you've got a judge that understands the evidence, et cetera. It would seem like to me you'd make an end run around this stuff. And the other part is, by the way, you know, this is her witness, and she sometimes doesn't seem like she knows what he's going to say. And so, you know, if you're going to have him testify, you know, make it clear and have some predictability related to that, but also get us to the point, because a judge kind of allows you maybe to cut through the red tape, for lack of a better term, so that she could probably do a better job of that.
Yeah. And, you know, it seemed to me, Katherine Lizardo, when I left this case last week, that really the defense argument is like you can't choose between the father and the son who actually did the killing because the son was on the stand. So I assume the defense is going to point to the son and maybe the father trying to cover up for the son. And the prosecution says, no, it's the father. Now, the judge knows that this man is a convicted sex offender, yet there's no sex charge here because the body was found almost a year later, certainly the next year, in a state that a lot of things couldn't be determined. So how does the judge then view all of this?
Well, the reason it's a bench trial too is because of that background of the defendant as a sex offender. Because it's a bench trial, the judge can compartmentalize, and in his ruling at the end of the case, when he writes his extensive ruling, he can and he will indicate which evidence he focused on. So whether it's irrelevant or not for his analysis about his sex offense, and most likely it would not be. I assume there were motions in limine before the trial that the judge could not consider that, because that it would be the probative value of that is highly prejudicial, at least highly prejudicial.
Yeah.
But you mentioned DL, the younger biological son who actually witnessed supposedly the shooting of the victim here. Sadly, he testified that his father poured the bleach in bushes. So that in itself, I think, is sufficient, and this forensic testimony is just supplemental to that, but I haven't heard anything that might be really useful for the state.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the victim was his son's half-sister of the child. But boy, I tell you, this is a horrible case no matter what way you look around it. And the prosecution, I guess, wants to put everything they did in to show they did everything to try to convict him. All right, we're going to take a quick break here at the Long Crime Network. Stay with us. We'll be back in that courtroom in Iowa on the other side.